Hello and welcome back to another great tutorial by Renderosity on Poser 11 and Poser Pro 11. I'm Mark Bremer, and in this movie we'll do something a little different than some of the other Poser-based movies that you've been watching and following along with. In this movie, very specifically, we're going to use Poser, but we're going to use the contents of Poser in other programs and look at reasons why we may want to do that and some advantages and disadvantages of doing those things. Now, if you're a Poser purist or only have one application, you may be wondering, why would you ever want to use Poser in some other program? There's a host of reasons, and if you know anything about me professionally, I'm an art mercenary, and I bow to the king of deadlines, and whatever software meets the final product needs and the timeline, I use those to make it happen. Also, you've seen some movies where I've built some scenes inside of Poser. You can do that. But working with something like View, for example, well, that's a whole nother range of outdoor environments that, the same way that Poser is optimized for working with characters, View is optimized for working with all sorts of scene building for outdoor scenes. Pretty cool stuff. We'll also look at using the Poser Fusion plugin that comes with Poser Pro, and I believe you can get or purchase separately from Smith Micro to import Poser characters into programs like C4D, Lightwave, Maya, those types of things. And you might be going, holy cow, those are out of my price range. You can still get away with it, I think, with some of the student versions of some of these programs if you're working with any of those. But really, most importantly, we're going to look at ways that we can start integrating some of these CG applications and what to do with them. So, I've got a character. This is Pauline. I've intentionally chosen a character with no clothes on here. And one of the reasons why is I want to show some issues that pop up when you happen to work with characters in other programs. We're going to look at the hand specifically here. When we look at this and we zoom in just a little bit more, you can tell that the hands are really smooth. When I roll my mouse over certain joints or off, you don't see any obvious connection of the mesh or joints. It's nice and smooth. Well, Poser's been optimized to do that. When we bring these meshes into other programs, they kind of play by different rules, and if you're going to be doing any close-ups of hands or something in these third-party programs, well, just know that sometimes you can hide that, sometimes you can't. This is less obvious when you're working with clothes. So now that I've said all that, and here we are, let's hop over to View. I'm working with View Extreme here, which is kind of the Studio Pro type of version here that does all sorts of things. If you don't know, View has imported Poser characters for years. A long, long time ago in a place far, far away, there was a single parent company for both View and Poser, and they decided to make them work interchangeably. That relationship has persisted ever since then for years and years. If you have View and have never imported a Poser character, you're in for a treat because you can do that. How do you do it? Super, super easy. You go ahead and come down to Import Object. And I do have to say, as we do this, we're going to look at how to set up the character and set up the system to import the character as well. I'm bringing this up because I think this latest round of View might, I know the functionality in the View Extreme is just built in for Poser characters. I think you might have to download from Eon Software a special little plugin that they've got, and my understanding is it's free for the other versions of View to get it to import characters. So just know that's there. Anyhow, back here at Standing 2, we'll get ready to load our character in, and we'll get a contextual dialog box. Some very, very important things to pay attention to here on import. The reason it's important is because if you've got a modest system with not a whole lot of RAM, working with View and Poser and importing the Poser character so you can repose it inside of View asks a lot, and by a lot I mean tons of RAM from your system. So if you've got a modest system, the wisest thing to do is not try to repose the character inside of View, but rather do it in Poser and then just bring it in like a mannequin that doesn't move here. So here's some things I like to do. Well, the first checkbox option is to group the figures as a single mesh. That's nice because it keeps your object browser very light and trim. There might be times if you're going to do something with a poser character or other poser items where you bring it into view and may want to separate parts. If you bring in individual parts, yeah, you can do some of that. Just thought I'd let you know. If you have a model system as well, there's an option here to do not refresh meshes while moving the timeline. If you bring in an animation, and yes, this will do or import animations from Poser, if you're scrubbing the timeline because you've got these camera moves going on inside of view, you can really bring your system to its knees if you've got a complex scene. So turning on or enabling the do not refresh meshes during that scrubbing of the timeline, great way to save some resources. In this case, I'm going to allow reposing inside of view. I'm going to want to use the Poser shader tree because, again, these two programs, View and Poser, play very, very nicely together. And I don't want to have to go in and tweak these shaders like I will probably have to, or at least talk about it inside of C4D. And anytime you hear me talk about C4D, know that I'm also talking about my Lightwave, all those render programs and their ilk. If you're going to do any reposing inside of view, I encourage you to use the quaternion interpolation, which is a geometric and mathematical function that makes the joints behave a little bit better. Also, you may want, even if you're not animating inside of view, if you've created a character in Poser and you've got some cape or something or a dress that's blowing in the wind, you can obviously set that up in Poser, and you are required to do some animation and some processing to make that look the way it does after the wind function is blowing and all that. That's where you would use this import single frame option and say, yeah, well, the cape looks great at about frame 30. So you can bring in only frame 30 here instead of bringing in the entire animation. In this case, no motion. We're going to come in at frame 0. And it asks me again, hey, you're going to be using a lot of RAM. Are you okay with that? Do you want to disable the features to do that? And the answer is no. I want to go ahead and repose in here. All right, it's thinking about it. And bada bing, bada boom, there's our character. Now, before I do anything to set up Poser to work with view, let's come to Preferences. And again, I'm working on a Mac here. Obviously, on a PC, they're in a slightly different place to Preferences. Under the View Options, General Preferences, we have Objects. And you'll see a Configure Poser Import. So in Preferences, if you don't have an option to configure Poser Import, you can't do it with your program, and you'll need to go ahead and import that little plugin to make it work. When you configure the Poser Import, it will ask what software developer kit you're going to use, SDK. In my case here, with this newer version of View Extreme, there's only one SDK involved. This is important because sometimes there's 2 or 3. And if you have bad luck importing Poser characters, like all of a sudden an arm looks kind of funny or things are just missing parts when they come in, change the software development kit being used and you may have better luck. Sometimes certain legacy characters come in better with other software development kits. Also, you do in fact need Poser somewhere where View can talk to it. If it can't find the Poser program, you're not bringing in Poser characters. So if you're watching this saying, well, yeah, I've got View, I don't have Poser, but do I need it? Yeah, you do, if you're going to import the characters like that. So I'll just cancel out of this. We'll cancel out of the other option here. If we do a quick render, and this is a preview render inside of View, we obviously have an environment here, and that's the big thing with View. You can change skies and environments with just a couple clicks of a button, and you're not dragging around image-based lighting or anything like that. I'll close these post-render options. If, for example, I wanted to bring in a mountain scene, well, we'll plunk kind of a mountain in there. Let me bring up a different little view here so I can drag our mountains away from the character just a little bit. And we'll stretch these out, and gosh, what a beautiful landscape, right? All right, let's come back to here. We'll make this our singular image again. And now let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit to our character. With the camera, so we don't get the weird little fisheye thing if we get in there kind of close, let's change this to about 80 millimeters. Sometimes you can do 100, even 200 if you want to flatten things out a little bit so you don't get, you've seen those pictures of dogs on the internet, right? The nose is huge and the head's really small. Well, we don't want to do that here. So let me zoom in just a little bit further. across my scene just a little bit. And then we'll do a quick render. Now we can obviously see that, hey, yeah, this is again a preview render. We can soup this up. I don't think you want to spend a lot of time watching me render in view, right? But I want to point out a couple things here. One is the skin tones look pretty nice right now. This character, Pauline's got some nice realistic skin with little freckles and imperfections in it. And we're seeing that here, this little chunkiness of the shadows. Well, that's just because it's a preview render. So let's come down to the hand area and zoom into that. I mentioned we would be doing it. Here we are. Hello. Let's get a little bit closer. Holding us down so we don't zoom in too far and just blow past this thing. Okay. Yeah. Scroll just a little bit. There. So in the preview you can't really tell. Let's do a quick render here, and we're going to look at these joints. The reason I'm bringing that up is that in View, like Poser, it's a content manipulation program, not a content creation program. So some of the plugins for smoothing out geometry we simply don't have in View. And you can kind of see that now with the joints. We're getting some lines showing up here. This is really obvious in organic forms that are, have no clothes on. That's why I picked Pauline here. We're seeing wrists, we're seeing thumb joints, finger joints. If you're working with clothes, this becomes far less of an item. And if you're working with dynamic types of cloth, we've used the cloth generator or the animator inside of Poser, that's a non-issue. But with skin, you can pick this out pretty easy. So just know that as we start working with it. Let me zoom back just a little bit here. Great, we've got our character, and let's move this here. So we've got the mountains in the background. Obviously, I could change a bunch of things. The nice thing with View, and one of the reasons you'd want to bring the characters in, is that you can just create new environments very, very easily. It updates super fast. You can do some renders. View is just a killer with outdoor renders. It does them so well. And adding trees and plants, so those types of things. Don't worry, we're not going to spend time doing that. But it's so easy to change with these third-party programs, some of this stuff. So, okay, you see that going on. How do you pose a character inside of View? I'm glad you asked. Even though we brought the character in as a single mesh, and I'll expand the object browser right here, we just have a single body here. You can go ahead and double click on the character and it will open the dialog box to go ahead and begin changing anything. So there's a hierarchy that presents slightly differently than you see it inside of Poser. If we want to work with this left arm, for example, where I just clicked there, we come down to left forearm. We don't have dials to slide around. And here's one of the issues of working with Poser inside of View. It's much more efficient to work with Poser in Poser. It's got the dials. It's designed to handle these characters very easily. While you can change the character inside of View here, it's a little bit of an ugly process. And by ugly, I mean, if we want to change the bend in this left forearm from -30, where it's at right now, to say, let's just highlight this. It's taking a while to do that. I'm going to press 0 and I'll say apply. It's going to think about it a little bit and then it moves the arm. Can you imagine trying to pose a hand or something this way? Exercise in insanity there if you do that. So just know that yes, you can make some adjustments here, but by no means is this set up to be a replacement for doing posing or animating inside of Poser. So I'll go ahead and click OK here. We've got our character back. Let's go ahead maybe and load in a different atmosphere just because we can. And I don't know, let's go for a nice Yosemite option here. They're upgraded. It's getting near evening inside of Yosemite, and here we are. Nice warm colors, clouds in the background. This is why you would want to work with Poser inside of View. And bringing in those animations, if you've got a character walking across a scene and position that imported Poser file so it walks through your View scene, really nice way to get some super great fully surrounded effects. So alright, that's still fine-tuning the render a little bit, taking a little longer because we've got clouds and fancy stuff going on. Let's hop over to C4D, and I'm going to close out of this to save a little RAM. Not that I'll run out, but you know, you might. Let's come over to Cinema. Now, Cinema has you use the Poser Fusion plugin. This is something that if you've purchased a Poser Pro 11, it comes with the purchase, whether you get it physically or online. You've got a serial number for it. It needs to be installed to plug into these programs. And these plugins do import to some of the lesser versions. You don't have to have the full studio version of Cinema 4D. Same thing with Maya. There's other options. It works with those, and the plugin works going back through all the versions, so you don't need the newest ones to make it work. So I've got that in here, and it's been installed. You'll find that under plugins, oh, look over here. See, View Extreme is a plugin for C4D. Kind of an expensive one, but it's great. And the difference between Cinema 4D, Lightwave, Maya is that these are content creation programs versus manipulation programs. So they're much more powerful. They do many things that Poser does not, and View does not. Just know that. Here's the Poser object. So I insert the object into my scene. Same type of thing you do for Maya and Lightwave. Know that. But you notice we don't have a character. We have to hunt it down from within this little teeny Poser interface. Now, the smaller Poser interface is telling us a couple things here. One is we don't have a lot of options. It's a direct link back to Poser. And the Poser Fusion plugin lets you render hair and everything beautifully, but you can't repose the character inside of C4D. And again, every time I say C4D, I'm talking about all the programs. So let's track down that same file. We'll go standing, thinks about it, plops our character in there. Let me center our character up. Go ahead and add a camera in here, and I'm going to change this camera to portrait one. And let me activate it. There, zooms in for us a little bit. As long as we're zooming in, let's come in and look at this hand. You'll see some of the same things going on. Some of these joints are a little more visible. I'll do a quick render. And yep, we're starting to see those. If I scroll here just a little bit or pan the scene, oh, stop that. There. You can still see that we've got this issue on the wrist. Now, if you're working with a regular full-fledged CG program, one of the things you can do is add some NURBS smoothing. Each program calls it a little something different. I'm going to highlight the Poser object here and add some smoothing. It smooths the character down a little bit, and if we're looking at shoulders or things like that, let me rotate here in my scene just a little bit. The NURBS smoothing takes the mesh that makes up Poser and gives it a very real, organic, smooth quality to it. Very nice. I'm going to turn it off for just a second, and we'll see things get a little bit angular around the joints. Poser has its own smoothing little gizmos built into it that you never see, but when you take it out of Poser and start using these meshes into another program, that's what you see. I'll turn the subdivision smoothing back on. Nice smooth shoulder there. Okay, so let's back out just a little bit. And, well, our character is gray, kind of a problem. Quick render, still gray. With the Poser object here, we need to actually use the Poser Fusion plugin and bring in the materials. So this goes back and subscribes to the materials and builds them up in the hosting 3D application. Let's do a quick render here, and I'll point out a couple things. While View is very nice with the skin tones, that kind of uses some similar techniques and respects the Poser way of doing business, the other CG programs like C4D does a pretty good job. Not a perfect job. And we're seeing a little less type of bump here. Again, you can come into any of the shaders and modify that, but just know that as you go into these other programs, it may require just a little bit of additional tweaking as well. So we're doing apples to apples. Let's do a couple things. So we can compare, say, the View scene to the C4D scene. Let's create a physical sky. Automatically adds kind of sun to our scene. Let's add a little global illumination here as well, since View was already operating with that. And when we do a render real quick, we'll see it doing a little bit of a bounce to light calculations right here, and it does a render out. And you might notice that it's rendering slightly faster than Poser does. Some of these programs that are, I'll call them a little more production grade programs, are powerful programs, and they do a great job. There's an argument right there to bring poser characters into another program so that if you've got a very complex, robust scene, it will render a little bit faster. Just know that. So we can see this working very nicely. And again, very limited options inside here. Some of these options we're seeing with the poser area right here. You just wouldn't really need to use the disable animation as if you brought in the full animation. You notice that when we were importing into view, you could import a specific frame. Can't do that inside of C4D here. So you get this option to disable animation. Or we can go ahead and do the poser start frame right here and say we want it to start at pose 15 or anything like that. Again, you can go back in and bring in animations just like you would otherwise. Important thing, since we can't pose inside of C4D or other hosting applications, if we want to change the character, we need to actually go back to poser itself. So let me go ahead and scroll our scene here just a little bit. Let's get our character. We'll grab the neck here. Maybe the head. We'll turn that just a little bit. Let's go twist and side to side just a little bit. Have that back. Looks like the hand's kind of floating in space, so maybe we'll do a little more side to side just a little bit. That's too far. Anyhow, to prove the point, let me go ahead and save this file. We'll go back to C4D. We've changed our character, and now if we want to go ahead and affect that change, we need to come back in here and reload. And while we do that, it thinks about it, talks back and forth to the file. There's our character. They've been repositioned. Nice. Let's do a render real quickly. Beautiful, right? Looks at the camera. Aw, darling. So we can see a very accelerated render time, but this is how you work with the poser files back and forth. So know that poser not only is great by itself and does fantastic renders, but you can go ahead and bring the poser content into other programs like View that has that functionality built in, or using the Poser Fusion plugin available from Smith Micro to really expand your options of working with the characters provided by the fantastic Poser Pro 11 and Poser 11.